Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave and this is Magic from Zero. Today I'll be talking about abilities. Thus far, we've seen many different types of Magic cards and many of them have some sort of ability. In the past, there were a lot more vanilla creatures, that is, creatures like this grizzly bears that have no abilities. That's becoming less and less common these days though, and in current Magic design, it's not an exaggeration to say that abilities are probably the most defining thing about a creature. Today's video will talk about the major types of abilities cards can have, give some examples of all of them, and show how they interact with other game concepts you've been introduced to in previous episodes. Ready? Let's get started. There are three main types of abilities: activated abilities, triggered abilities, and static abilities. Any of the permanent cards can have any of these types of abilities, and even instants and sorceries can have them, although that's much less common. Technically, the instructions that you follow on an instant or sorcery spell that you perform when it resolves constitute a fourth class of abilities, spell abilities, but when you talk about abilities in the context of Magic, most people will probably assume that you're referring to one of those other three types that I mentioned earlier. Most people, even most judges, probably would not even know what a spell ability is if you asked them. As such, this video will focus only on the other three types of abilities. We'll start with activated abilities. I've mentioned these before, but as a refresher, these are abilities that have a cost to activate them and an effect that happens as the ability resolves. Here are a couple of examples of cards that have activated abilities. Activating an activated ability is very similar to casting a spell. In fact, according to this rule here, the process is actually so similar that it's exactly the same, with the only exception being the very first step of casting a spell, which involves moving the card that represents that spell onto the stack. Activated abilities still use the stack, but when you're activating one, the card that has the ability generally does not change zones. Everyone just has to remember that there's an invisible activated ability on the stack if someone responds to one. The defining feature of an activated ability is the colon, which separates the cost from the effects. Any ability that you see with a colon is an activated ability, and any ability that does not have a colon is not an activated ability. Now I'll put a small asterisk here because sometimes, especially with keywords, the colon is not printed on the card. You need to look up the official definition of that keyword in the comprehensive rules to see it. For example, this Street Wraith has cycling, which is an activated ability. Even though there's no colon printed on this version of Street Wraith, if you look up in the comprehensive rules what cycling means, you can find the colon in the definition. Some other printings of Street Wraith have reminder text, which summarizes what cycling means, and you can see the colon there too. Be careful about this too, though. Just like any other text on a card, sometimes reminder text can be inaccurate because of changes in how a mechanic works since the card was printed. Actually, the purpose of reminder text is to just be a reminder, so sometimes it's not rigorously accurate to start with. This sort of thing trips up a lot of newer players, especially people who came from other card games, since many other TCGs do not have any equivalent of keywords or reminder text, and the words on the card are meant to describe exactly what the card does. The greater role in Magic's official rules in explaining how interactions work relative to the card text takes a while to get used to, but the benefit is that Magic interactions can be much more exact with much less text, and in almost all cases, it's possible to derive rulings from official card text and rules documents rather than relying on a list of official rulings given by the game's publisher. Another example of this comes from the Summoning Sickness rule. Recall from previous discussions that creatures cannot attack unless they started your most recent turn under your control. Neither can they be tapped to activate any activated ability. This means that if you played this Llanowar Elves, it could not tap for green the turn that entered the battlefield. Pretty simple, right? Well, what about this Seton Crozen Protector? Now, if you played that, could you tap it for green right away? And it turns out the answer is yes. This apparent contradiction is explained if you look at the specific text of the Summoning Sickness rule. As you can see, it specifically bars activating a creature's ability that includes the tap symbol in its activation cost, whereas Llanowar Elves' ability uses this symbol, Seton's does not, and this explains the difference in the rulings. Let's have another look at an activated ability. This Cutthroat Centurion has an ability that can give itself +2/+2 until end of turn. You can see there's no tap symbol, so you can activate this ability the turn Cutthroat Centurion comes into play, but there's a different restriction on it. You can only activate this ability once per turn. Some other restrictions that you might encounter only allow you to activate an ability during certain parts of the turn, or during certain players' turns, but the most common instruction is to activate only as a sorcery. Recall from earlier discussions that instants can be cast anytime you have priority to cast a spell, including on other players' turns or in response to other spells and abilities. In contrast, sorceries can only be played on your turn if the stack is empty and it's your main phase. Ordinarily, activated abilities can be activated using the instant speed timing, but ones that say activate only as a sorcery are, of course, exceptions to this rule. I've already talked about one specific type of activated ability that uses the sorcery speed timing in a previous video in the series, the equip keyword. Almost all equipment have an equip ability that allows you to attach it to one of your creatures. There's no colon printed on this specific card, but as you can see, the official definition of the keyword does show the colon, and it also has that sorcery speed restriction baked right in. Now this explains, for example, the middle ability on cranial plating. You can pay 1 to activate the normal equip ability, but this card also has a second ability that lets you attach it to a creature for 2 black mana. At first glance, it might not make sense why anyone would ever want to use that ability because it costs twice as much, but notice that the middle ability does not have a sorcery speed restriction. This means that, for example, it would be possible to attack with several creatures, wait to see which ones get blocked, and attach the cranial plating to one of the ones that got through. This sort of play would not be possible with normal equipment. Another special activated ability with a sorcery speed restriction is loyalty abilities. I mentioned planeswalkers in a previous video also. Each planeswalker has one or more loyalty abilities. As you can see, these abilities use a colon, so that means they do officially count as activated abilities. The special symbol on the left represents a cost of adding or removing the appropriate number of loyalty counters from planeswalkers, from which the loyalty abilities get their name. The planeswalker's starting loyalty is shown in that box in the bottom right corner. It doesn't say anywhere on the card, but if you look in the rules, planeswalker loyalty abilities are subject to 2 different restrictions. The first is that loyalty abilities can only be activated at sorcery speed, just like I mentioned. The other is that each planeswalker can only use one of its loyalty abilities each turn. This limit is per planeswalker, not per ability, by the way. And that's about it for activated abilities. The next type of abilities that I'll discuss is triggered abilities. Schematically, these are abilities that do something anytime a specific trigger condition happens. Like activated abilities, they use the stack and have effects, that is, instructions that are followed at the time they resolve, but unlike activated abilities, you do not choose when to activate them. Rather, anytime the condition happens, the ability will trigger, and then it'll automatically go on the stack the next time that a player would get priority. Here are a couple of examples of cards with triggered abilities. You can see the trigger conditions at the beginning of your upkeep, when this creature enters the battlefield, whenever you discard. These 3 words, when, whenever, and at, are characteristic of trigger conditions. If you do not see one of those words, it is not a triggered ability. The same asterisk from the activated abilities section applies here though. Sometimes the special word does not appear on the card, but it is in the official definition of a keyword given in the comprehensive rules. There are many types of special triggered abilities that you may encounter in a game of Magic, such as reflexive triggers, zone change triggers, intervening if triggers, and state triggers. Each of these has special rules associated with them, and I plan to discuss each of these rules topics in detail in their own dedicated videos. The basics that I've covered here, though, are enough to get you started for most games of Magic, though. I do want to call out one special type of triggered ability, and that's mana abilities. Activated abilities and triggered abilities can be mana abilities, and the sheer amount of these makes it important to have at least a small amount of background for how they work. So as the name suggests, these are abilities that can give you mana, like the Llanowar Elves ability or the bottom ability of this Wild Growth. Now the special rule around mana abilities is that unlike normal activated or triggered abilities, mana abilities do not use the stack, so they cannot be responded to. In order to be considered a mana ability, an ability must be capable of giving you mana as it resolves. It also cannot have a target. Loyalty abilities cannot be mana abilities, and triggered abilities need to trigger, loosely speaking, from something else that gives you mana. The special handling of mana abilities comes from mana's status as one of the most fundamental resources in a game of Magic. Responding to a mana ability, along with anything else that interferes with the player's ability to generate mana, would be very difficult to balance from a game design standpoint. Now, the final type of abilities are static abilities. There's no characteristic templating to look out for with these. Static abilities are just written as statements. These abilities don't use the stack or require priority, they just work all the time, or at least all of the time that the card's text specifies. For example, Annex has a static ability that gives you control of whatever land you played on. Changeling is a keyworded ability that means that this creature has all creature types, and Glorious Anthem gives all your creatures a power and toughness buff. All these are examples of continuous effects because they continue to affect the game for a duration. These effects can also be the subject of an upcoming video in the series. Due to the various complex factors in how they operate, interactions between continuous effects have gained a reputation for being among the most difficult and non-intuitive rules topics. Next, have a look at this Coastal Tower. It has an ability that makes it enter the battlefield tapped. Now, this is called a replacement effect because it replaces the normal default event of Coastal Tower entering with entering tapped. Can you guess why this card couldn't have had a simpler triggered ability to accomplish this? Something like, when this land enters, tap it? The reason is that triggered abilities use the stack so they can be responded to. You could therefore activate the bottom ability of this poorly templated Coastal Tower in response to the ability that taps it, circumventing its drawback. There are other types of templates characteristic for replacement effects. The most common are ones that have a permanent enter with counters on it, ones that use the words as this permanent enters the battlefield, and ones that use the word instead. Let's close out with a couple of challenge questions to test your understanding. First up, Amy plays Koldatha Flamefiend and wants to sacrifice her artifact and deal 4 damage to Nick's Grizzly Bears. Could Nick naturalize Amy's artifact in response to save his creature? And to answer this question, let's go through officially what happens in the game step by step. Amy's Flamefiend enters, causing its ability to trigger. As she puts that ability onto the stack, Amy has to choose targets. It's at this point, therefore, that Nick knows his creature is in danger. Nick can respond to Amy's ability by casting an instant spell or activating an activated ability. If he has a naturalize, that would destroy Amy's artifact before she has any opportunity to sacrifice it. Alternatively, if he has a pump spell like this Giant Growth, he could buff his Grizzly Bears so that it would be big enough to survive the 4 damage. The somewhat unfortunate bit, though, is that Amy does not decide which artifact to sacrifice or whether she wants to sacrifice one at all until the ability is resolving. If Nick responds with a naturalize, Amy would be able to sacrifice a different artifact, and if he has a Giant Growth, Amy could simply decline to sacrifice anything at all. As a special sneak peek, have a look at Cornered Crook. Its ability features a reflexive triggered ability, which is the special template WotC came up with to make situations like this work a little bit more intuitively. Notice how the 3 damage happens inside of its own discrete triggered ability, separate from the when the artifact is sacrificed one. I'll leave it to the good people of the comments section to discuss what bearing this might have on the rulings for this scenario. Next up, let's say Amy activates the bottom ability of Nykthos Shrine to Nyx and says she's naming green. Nick wants to respond by playing a Doomblade to kill one of Amy's creatures, reducing her devotion. Is this possible? To answer this one, let's first observe that Nykthos' ability could add mana to Amy's mana pool, doesn't have a target, and isn't a loyalty ability. This means this ability is a mana ability, and mana abilities do not use the stack. This means it is not possible for Nick to respond to this ability at all. Finally, we'll say that Amy plays a Meddling Mage. She wants to name Lightning Bolt. Nick has a pretty good idea that that's what she's going to do. Could he play Lightning Bolt against the Meddling Mage before Amy names a card? If not, when's the latest that he could cast this spell? To answer this one, let's carefully read the text of Meddling Mage's ability. Notice that this does not use the word at, when, or whenever, indicating this is not a triggered ability. Recall that as this creature enters is rather a template characteristic of a replacement effect. Naming a card, therefore, happens as part of the process of Meddling Mage entering. There is no time when Meddling Mage is on the battlefield, and it is legal to cast whatever named card was. If Nick thinks that Amy will name Lightning Bolt, his best bet is to cast the Lightning Bolt in response to the Meddling Mage spell on the stack. And that's all I have for you today. With this, you should have a great foundation for all the different types of abilities you'll see on Magic cards. You should be able to identify activated abilities, triggered abilities, and replacement and continuous effects from static abilities on cards, and be able to tell how these all interact with other rules concepts like timing and priority. Join me again next time for another ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.